back to another episode of Meet the Creatives. Today I am joined by Ted Belton. Ted, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's just very exciting.
I love when celebrities tag photographers. I've talked about this before on the show, but it was really cool to see Dan Levy gave you a shout out on his Instagram. He said that caption I think read that he lives for the drama, and the pictures, the portraits that you took were absolutely beautiful. And as I mentioned before the show, I'm totally on a kick of starting off my portrait photography journey. And when I saw that picture, and then I clicked on your Instagram feed. I can tell that your work is well informed and you're working with all the right lenses and all the right influences. I'm like, I got to meet this guy. So I reached out to you, and here we are, like less than 48 hours later, we're doing it. The internet is a wonderful place. Maybe for people that saw that shoot, I know a lot of people saw it. It was for Dior, correct?
Yeah. So it was for Dior for for the Critics' Choice Awards. He has this amazing Dior look. So Dior asked us to do some pictures
Nice.
in this. Yeah, I guess it's the fall winter 21-22 collection. So
Nice. Very
he's
cool.
probably one of the first people to wear it. So it was like cool exclusive.
Iconic. I love it. That's good. So my last guest, Art Schreiber, who you probably know, he had this great idea for a question. And rather than being like, so tell me about how you got started in photography, he recommended I do this question. So here we go. Shout out Art Schreiber. What were the key moments, the pivotal moments along your way that led you to become a portrait photographer? Thank you, Art, for making me sound smart right out of the gate. Here we go. Ted, take it away.
Excellent question.
Yes. Shout out Art.
Yeah, I think. Well, it wasn't. I sort of hit a couple other things before I came to photography and portrait photography specifically. I grew up thinking I was going to be an actor, and so, but I think that's important because I had an interest in like character and narrative and things like that.
Right.
Specifically, that idea of like creating a character and how you put a person together and then represent it. So I think that was an important thing. And then I ended up going to film school because I had sort of developed an interest in photography in high school. So I went to film school for university, which was sort of acting and photography put together. And then I learned a lot about collaboration and the types of collaborations I like and don't like. And that sort of pushed me more towards stills rather than film. So I think that was an important pivot. And then I started shooting a lot of fashion straight out of university. And now, yeah, I'm sort of like occupy that space between fashion and portraiture now. But I think really the things that really put me together were like the acting, and then I was also really into illustration
Their
and
illustrations are amazing. I saw that, and it's funny
oh
because
yeah.
I'm actually really encouraged by your portfolio because people are always like, oh, like pick a lane, do something. But then I
Mm.
saw on your portfolio, it's like you're a portrait photographer, but you also have like illustration, and there's these varying different styles, and I think that you do them all well. So it's kind of cool that you can be sort of jack of all trades, and
I'm
you
trying.
show
I
me
mean,
that it's possible.
I mean, it's interesting when I started getting illustration work because I didn't do any. I hadn't done any illustration work since I was like 19, 20, and then I started posting it on Instagram because it was always just something that I did, on my off time.
Right.
And I started posting it on my Instagram, and I started getting my photography clients, like editorial clients, asking me to do illustrations for magazines or whatever. And I always felt really bad about it because I know other illustrators who are like full-time illustrators, and it's like that's what they do.
Right.
I always felt bad taking those jobs. But then I was like, I always wanted to do this. Like when I was a kid, I always wanted to be an illustrator. And like, how crazy would I have to be to say, no, I'd rather not. You take it and see what happens, because that's what happens to everybody that we look at who like has these incredible careers and these, great bodies of work and stuff. At a certain point, they just had to make a choice and go, decide whether they were going to do it or not do it. Like not everything comes to you packaged perfectly, neatly.
Right.
Sometimes you just have to like do random stuff and it turns out well and it becomes part of your work. The
Was
illustration stuff has ended up, now that I've started doing it more and sharing it online and stuff, I've started to see how it relates to my photography. So I'm starting to look at it as like one body of work rather than um, two separate things, which is just like an interesting creative exercise
Yeah,
in itself. So
absolutely. I had a kind of a similar experience. I went uh, to school as originally I was going to go for marketing, and then they were like, "We've seen your math scores. You should definitely not be doing marketing. This is like all about numbers. Have you tried graphic design?" So then I tried graphic design. I got into like branding and logos and stuff, and then I was a terrible student, and I thought I was going to graduate in like this one year. I think it was like 2016, and then it turned out I had like a whole another like year of school essentially. I was like, what? How did this happen? Because I had transferred over, some of the credits didn't count, so I had this like I wouldn't say it was like a full year, but it was almost a year. It felt like a year, and I had to take all these film classes. I was like, I am not a film major. I'm watching like I'm watching The Apartment, but this doesn't necessarily correlate to my my photography and graphic design skills. This kind of seems, but the program, it turned out, it actually all kind of came together because I developed a love for old movies and sort of like that noir type look. I love things in black and white. It's part of the reason why I love your work so much. And it all kind of comes together. Like I fell in love with like cinematography, and even though I wasn't in that per se, my understanding of composition got better. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And for the most part, I was dabbling in branding and graphic design, but then I would get fired from gigs because I couldn't illustrate. But then I all of a sudden had to like use like Photoshop brushes and stuff, and I was like, oh, I kind of like this. So it's been kind of all over the place. And at first, that was kind of like disconcerting, but now I'm like, oh, I think this is the way that it's supposed to be. This is sort of the beauty of being in the creative field. And while it's kind of hard to pin one thing down, it's okay to just be in the moment and realize like, like not for nothing, but I'm having fun right now. Like who gives a fuck,
yeah,
It kind of
yeah,
took a while to get to that place though, because I was like, oh, I need to find, because you get it in your mind like I need to be on one path, I need to be doing
yeah,
one thing, but not necessarily.
yeah. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah,
Even specific to in the field of portrait photography, there's so many ways you can go about it, and so many types of clients you can have, and so many ways you can look at people. And it weirdly took a long time for me to allow myself to think about, I can do all of these things. I don't just have to shoot in black and white, for example, which was like my
right.
thing.
Yeah,
Or I don't just have to shoot people of a certain, like it just takes a long time to open your brain up and learn how to look at everything, um, maybe as yourself, rather than trying to apply some sort of contrived aesthetic to everything. Or but yeah, just like that constant opening up of my brain has been like the thing that I work on the most, or have been working on the most
yeah,
for my
getting out of your own
whole
way kind of
career.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah, because we come into it, or I came into it, similar to you, sort of from film school, and knowing that I liked that very cinematic aesthetic, and loving old films and black and white and all that.
I could see the
And
nostalgia. People who love nostalgia,
yeah,
there's like a kinship there. I could see it. I'm like, this guy
yeah,
is, this guy has been in the archives, so to speak.
for sure. Yeah, no, I definitely have an interest in old stuff, which you
Yeah,
can
me too.
probably actually tell from my the junk pile that's behind me. But yeah, so that's where I drew a lot of inspiration originally, pretty directly from movies and old magazines and old photography and stuff. And yeah, at a certain point, you just kind of go, I can't keep referencing the same things. I have to open my mind up, and maybe contemporary things are really valid and interesting, and maybe you know popular things right now are just as valid and interesting as the established work from the 50s or 60s or whatever that we all praise. So
It's funny you say that because I've been looking at all this old work. Like I looked at I now help me out if I'm gonna pronounce these wrong, but Josef Karsh, is it
yeah,
Josef
yeah,
Karsh I was looking at,
I have
and
a crush
then
book right here. Actually, I do, right in front of me.
see, I'm telling you, man, I love it.
I have all his books. He's
I was
Canadian. He was Canadian.
Canadians have all the best artists. So Josef Karsh I've been looking at. Am I saying that correctly, by the way?
Yeah, yeah, Yusuf Karsh. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, beautiful. And Felipe Halsman, is he Canadian
Oh,
too?
yeah. Philippe Hosman. No, he's French, and I just packed his book. I have it somewhere over here.
Dude, listen, if you're doing a moving sale and you want to be like all minimalist and you want to get rid of some of this stuff, you let me
Not a
know.
chance.
Okay,
Not a
that's good.
chance. It's the only thing that I carry with me everywhere is like my boxes and boxes and boxes of books.
Last week when I spoke to Art, one of the things that really stuck out to me, he talked about he had like these binders full of references, and I was like, oh, like people that are great at photography, not only do they spend a lot of time taking pictures, but it's okay to spend time just like looking through old photos. Am I on Pinterest? I think I have like 1,500 photos, and I started that board like a month ago of portraits and different compositions and influences. And for a long time, I was like, no, I have to like make. I have to be constantly shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I'm a little bit more like, no, I want to kind of siphon from the greats and see like study the masters before me and then kind of apply that to my own work. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of exciting about that nostalgic, that old school way of photography, where it's a little bit more, there's a little more craft behind it. I think nowadays it's just so easy just to get like a great camera, but looking at
Yeah.
the composition and the lighting and just thinking about the fact they had to do that on film. Like if they could do that on film, then I could certainly do some things. It's just kind of a matter of studying the greats and kind of infusing that in my own
Mm-hmm.
work without
Mm-hmm.
being a carbon copy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that kind of study is, I think it's important, and it was a huge part of my development. I'm like an avid, chronic collector of books and magazines. Um, and my approach has always been sort of the what you just described, which is 80% study and 20% making things.
That's
um
good to hear.
yeah, I mean I think the result of that has been, it's been a pretty slow crawl for me, or it was for a long time, because my output was not huge, and I've been very slow to sort of do, make certain career moves or whatever. But I'm getting more comfortable with like moving quickly and opening up and trying new things and not being quite so calculated in the projects I do or don't do, and just sort of allowing everything to be interesting. Um, but yeah, I mean, what you said about film is interesting, and the way, things used to be done.
I feel like they would think of us as like if they can come back in a time machine. I feel like they'd be like these kids are soft. I
I don't
feel
know about that. I don't know.
like
I think, I mean, probably, I'm sure some people would be. In fact, I mean, certainly there are photographers now who still shoot entirely on film,
right.
who would really look down on anybody who shoots digitally. And until the pandemic, I shot 85% of everything on film.
Really? Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, yeah, until last year, because like the labs closed, and I was like, oh my god, what's going to happen with my income? Like, I can't afford to shoot film anymore. So I took it as an opportunity to like really lean into digital and to try and figure out a way that I can do digital in a way that I like. Because the thing about film, I mean, people like, it seems like it's harder to shoot on film, and it is practically harder to shoot on film. It takes more time, you have to focus more, but those are good things. Like, it demands your focus in a way that digital doesn't. So, but you need that focus to do good photos anyway. So in a way, it sort of in a way, it makes it easier, because
Right.
it just demands that of you. And then also, film decides a lot for you, just visually. If you choose a film stock and you're sort of stuck with, that's how that's how the grain is going to look, that's how the color is going to look, or that's how the contrast is going to look, or whatever,
Right.
and you can't change it so much. So in a
Yeah,
way, it
it's not
gives you
like
a
camera
nice,
raw. You're not going to be able to get that information and move that information around.
yeah.
I
I mean,
love showing
some,
people that aren't photographers, showing them camera raw and like and then to like watch
yeah,
this, like watch how much, because if you get like the right exposure digitally with like a raw file, it is extraordinary the things that you could do. And I always kind
oh
of feel
yeah,
like it feels like cheating in a way, you know, whereas
yeah.
a
I used
film
to
you
think
can't do
that.
that. Yeah,
I used to think that for sure, especially specifically about digital in general. I always felt like, no, I really want to learn how to do this in camera, on film, whatever. But then, even in my film workflow, I started to realize that I really like seeing the mistakes or seeing the limits of the medium. And so when I would shoot film, this is like the worst thing to admit, but I came to a point where I wouldn't even meter sometimes. I would just shoot, and then sometimes it would be like way overexposed or way underexposed. But then pulling it back in post production, you get really weird effects and really interesting things. And to me, that was somehow just a more comfortable way of working. And obviously, like I wouldn't do that for everything, because sometimes you need like a real exposure. But for the work that I really like, that I personally, the pictures that I really react to of my own, it's the ones that are always a little bit wrong. And so in figuring out my digital workflow, I sort of do the same thing. And like you said, you can do so much with those files, and they come out so clean that what I do now sometimes is I will underexpose by like 10 stops and then push it in, because I got a 5D Mark IV a couple years ago, and previous to that I had been using like an old Mark II, and actually the Dan Levy pictures I did on my Mark II, because
Wow.
the tether port wasn't working on my Mark IV. So do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like whatever. Like, just
That's like inspiring, because I have like I could do that. I feel like I could be a real boy now. Yeah.
I would have done it on my iPhone if the Mark II hadn't worked, and I think honestly it would have turned out pretty much the same.
Wow.
Especially for web, like nobody's pixel peeping anyway.
Right.
But when I got the Mark IV, I was like, oh my god, this is cheating. Like, you can point this camera in any direction and just do the thing, and it just, you can get the picture back. So, but it got me thinking, and I was like, oh, maybe I can use that. Yeah, and then maybe there's the latitude in those files is like an interesting thing to play with. So
Yeah.
it's probably not what most people use that camera for. Most people, I think, probably use their very nice cameras for getting very clean, nice exposures with proper color. And whereas I'm like, ooh, so much I can mess up.
Yeah. That's cool though. It's an interesting approach, and I think it's something that I need to kind of think about more, is kind of like breaking those traditional rules. Since we're on the technical stuff, and by the way, I love getting nerdy about this photography stuff, because I've done a lot of podcasts where like advice for entry level creatives and people just coming in, and that's great. But photography is one of those things that's kind of fun to like geek out about. So I love where this is going. Let's get downright nerdy with it.
Geeky.
Okay, so my 30th birthday is coming up. As I mentioned before the show, I just got a Canon R6. Well, the church got a Canon R6, which I'm allowed to use. And I'm excited about it. My love for photography is here, and it's here to stay. But I've been watching, I don't know if you watch her YouTube channel, Julia Trotti. She's a photographer from Australia. She's amazing. I'll send you it. You'll be obsessed. It will be your new thing that you binge watch all the time. She's a portrait photographer from Australia. She does these amazing natural light, backlit, beautiful bokeh, like the whole 9 yards. Okay, so I started watching all these videos about different focal lengths and about different cameras and full frame and crop frame and all this different stuff. And I've been thinking, for my birthday, I want to get like some good glass. I have like a 24 to 70 2.8. I have the 70 to 200 2.8, but I want to get some prime lenses. I'm curious to know, what lenses are you using, and not even so much about like the specs of it, but I'm talking more like focal length. Like I think I want to get like a 30. A lot of people like the 35, like the 51.2 is good for sort of like that Instagram sort of look, like that sort of model look. And the 85 gets that real like tight headshot, like magazine cover kind of thing. But if you were in my position and you want to start in portrait photography, you want to have something that's like versatile, do you use prime lenses? And if so, what lens should I get, basically, out of all those?
What lens should I get? I miss talking about this, because it's been a long time since I like geeked out about gear. I used almost only a 50 mil for years. Like
a 1.2, like a
no, I think I had a 1.4 and then it broke. So then I got a 1.8 and then it broke, and then I got another 1.8 and then it broke.
How
and then I got
how are you breaking all these?
I treat my stuff like garbage. I'm just a bad person, and because as much as I love like cameras and stuff, I'm not like I don't know, maybe I'm just irresponsible. But
I'm the same way though. I always have my I don't put my lens caps back on when I change lenses.
yeah,
I don't always turn it off.
I
I have
lose them all the time, and then the filter gets dirty, and then I start using the filter as a lens cap, and then I just take the filter off when I want to
I feel
shoot.
like it's a little bit
Worst habit.
it's a little bit sus though if your gear is a little bit too clean. Like I feel like if you're really like a working, I mean, some
Yeah,
people are very like detail oriented, but I feel when I see someone and they have like all their lens caps and stuff and like the latest gear,
like you have too much time on your hands.
it's a little bit sus to me. It seems like you're not
Oh,
really working. There should be at least like a scratch or something
yeah.
somewhere. Yeah.
50, I think everybody should get a 50. It's just like you can do everything. It can do wider stuff. You can move in for a closer portrait. I think 35s are great. They have a very classic look to them. And I'm a big fan of a kind of old school reportage photography and tour photography, like music photography from the 70s and stuff. And that was all like 35. Um, Usually, or even wider sometimes. And I
Right.
like a wider portrait where you see some of the environment, but that you are limited to that. Like
Unless you want to get like
it's
right
very
up in their grill.
yeah, it's a very specific thing to do. Like, I mean, this is quite a wide frame, it's quite a specific thing to do a wide close up. And if
Right.
that's what you're into, that's cool, but it limits you. And it especially limits you if you're trying to flatter someone. Not everybody looks good in a 35 close up. So that's why the 50 is good, because it kind of works for every kind of face. The 85 I would actually use more for like a full body shot rather than a close up, just because I actually do like that slightly wider close up. But for full body, you want to get the compression, and it makes all of the proportions look better if you're a little bit more telephoto. Like
Right.
the 85 to 100 mil range I usually would use for, like, if I'm doing fashion and I need the full body, I would usually actually go a little longer,
Yeah.
um, just because there's less distortion on the body. So I don't know. I mean, it depends what kind of work what kind of work someone wants to do. I think a 35 is a good place to start, because it gives you, it's pretty accurate to what our frame of view is, right? Like your
Yeah.
eyes, it's kind of like a 35. So you can sort of frame things in a very natural way.
And I feel like you
Um,
could probably get some like with a prime lens too, like depending on the composition of it. I think it's good because it kind of has like, and this is probably why I'm going to go with a 35. It seems like it's sort of like the natural field of view, but it's also capable, like with the right glass, of getting that kind of like bokeh to kind of focus it in almost. So it looks
mhm,
sort of like natural, but not like distorted. But I don't know.
yeah,
I'll probably get the 50 eventually too. I had the 50, like the cheap, like nifty 50, like Canon one,
yeah, yeah. I
and
love those.
I sold it the week that I moved to my condo because I was not going to be able to make rent. So I sold all my cheap little like, and now I kind of miss it, but we'll see.
Hmm. Yeah, mine is stuck on. I have an old Canon. I think it's called a 1N. It's like the SLR film SLR from the 90s. So it looks like a 5D, but it's film.
Right.
And my 50 is stuck on it, and it's been stuck on it for like 2 years. So I haven't. That's the only camera I use the 50 on now.
Yeah.
Just because I've been too lazy to go get it repaired.
I'm realizing a theme here.
Yeah, no, I'm just like, I don't know. It's also kind of like I kind of like that. It's sort of like life telling me, it's like, oh, my 50 is stuck on this camera. Maybe this is just my 50 camera, or maybe
I like
the
it.
tether port doesn't work on this camera. Maybe I only shoot to card on this camera. It's like
Yeah.
pain in the ass for clients, I'm sure, but I sort of like to just go with the flow, because I like limitations on my work. I don't want people to tell me what to do, but I like the world giving me limitations. If I show up to a location, for example, and it's really dark and something went wrong and I didn't get the rentals I needed, or I couldn't bring my equipment, or I'm traveling and I don't have lights or something, and I show up somewhere and the light is horrible, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, how can I work with this? Maybe like there's light somewhere.
Right.
And I actually, some of my favorite pictures are the ones taken in like the worst circumstances, because you have to be creative. And
Yeah.
I think about that with my gear too. It's like if something doesn't work, or if something, goes wrong, just like, go with the flow. You can't do that for jobs. Like clients really don't like that when that happens. But for my personal work, I'd much prefer something go wrong, because then you have to be creative,
Yeah.
basically.
I love it, dude. This is so good. I really appreciate your honesty too, because I feel like people always kind of come so like buttoned up. It's good to hear
Oh,
that kind of
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, I don't have any.
um,
There's nothing like fancy or
but
uh,
that's cool though, because what's funny is that your work looks fancy. Your work looks
yeah,
like you kind of have sort of a, and I mean this as a compliment, sort of like a bougie like
yeah,
fashion sort of,
for
it
sure.
has a certain look to it, which is, and then talking to you, I see kind of like the artist side of you, which is
Mhm.
really kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that I love that. Like we can get into that. Like I love
Yeah,
that like
absolutely.
bougie fashion world. Like I'm a huge fan of that world, and I'm so grateful that I get to work in
Me
it
too.
and
That's
play
that's
in
why
it.
I have this background. This background is my
Blue
attempt.
Velvet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
blue velvet.
I mean, I don't know if you can see, but I've painted the room. It's like all glossy navy blue.
I did see that
It's like
immediately.
very ridiculous. I love a little bit of
This is my attempt to sort
cats.
of be like a I when I built out this studio, I had a projector on the wall and I was watching all these old movies, like all these like Cary Grant movies,
Mm,
like Charade with like Audrey Hepburn and stuff,
yeah,
and like White Christmas, and they had all, and
love
they
White Christmas.
me too.
My mom's favorite movie.
My wife was like, yeah, like it's pretty good. Like the ending was good. And I was like, how dare you? I want to
Yeah.
live in this world. I want to roast a hot dog at that little fireplace. No, but I really do love those movies, and this is like my attempt to sort of bring back some of like the
A little bit
romance
of
of it.
elegance, a little mid-century elegance. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah,
I
I
like
want to
that.
have like an orange couch. I want to have sort of
Yeah,
like the Don Draper look.
I think a lot of that mid-century elegance still exists, and I that's a huge part of the draw of working in fashion for me is that a lot of people still have that yearning, that attitude, and that sense of luxury and finery, and
Yeah,
it's there. It's not always a question of money. Like sometimes it's just a question of taste, and in fashion, you find a lot of people who have respect for taste,
yeah.
and it's fun, and those are fun people to photograph and to work with too.
I think something that would be kind of fun to talk about is, we're talking about gear and all this different stuff, and that's important to an extent. As you mentioned, you can kind of just, it's more about dealing with the elements, but um, I think that posing people for portraits is something that is oftentimes overlooked. I think, because it doesn't. I think part of it is there's sort of like this like clickbaity, like which camera should you buy that looks really great in a YouTube thumbnail, but people
Mm,
are feel like are less inclined for things like how to pose somebody or like,
yeah.
working with sort of like the interpersonal side of photography. So could you maybe talk about that? Like how do you put somebody at ease who is
Mhm.
maybe not necessarily used to have it? They're not somebody who like moves around
Yeah,
like this.
yeah.
I didn't know that they did that, by the way. I
And in
recently
fact,
learned
I hate it when people do that.
I learned that models they go like this the entire time, and it freaks me the fuck out. It's like super weird.
Yeah, there are two different ways of shooting. Sometimes I really appreciate when people come to set and they know how to pose and they know their angles, because sometimes you only have 30 seconds to do a picture.
Right.
So that's comes in handy on those days. But for pretty much every other situation, I much prefer when the the pose, if you want to call it that, is less contrived and it's more, you know, people just, it's like you said, just making people comfortable is the
Yeah.
important part of it. And then it's my job to understand. I mean, basically, there's no other way to say this. I mean, you want to flatter people, you want to make people look good, like
Right.
that everybody wants to look, you know, thinner or taller or whatever. I mean, it's not so much the case now. I think that's changing and people are becoming much more accepting of themselves and other people. So in
Yeah.
that way, it's made my job a lot easier actually, because not everybody does expect to come out of a photo shoot looking, 5'11" and
Right.
you know, zero like it's been an interesting few years in that way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because it's made my job easier because you can just take a genuine picture of somebody rather than a flattering picture, if you want to call it that.
Right.
So that's changed a bit, but yeah, I've always paid pretty close attention to pose, because I always wanted to be the person who could take a very flattering picture of anyone. And I've always worked with a very broad range of people. and I work with a lot of older people, and I've always wanted to be able to make people feel good with the way that they're being represented. And but that doesn't come from me, looking at them and saying, oh, put your hand here and do this. It's more about talking to them and understanding who they think they are and how they want to be represented, and then just sort of naturally letting that side of them come out and encouraging that side of them to come out.
Right.
And then once everybody's comfortable and we feel like we're having a real conversation or a real, moment, then it's my job to look at it objectively and graphically and go, okay, compositionally speaking, your leg should be here, your hand should be here, your head should be this way. It's slightly better, like I wonder if, like it's really just a graphic thing.
Yeah.
Kind of going, oh, it actually just looks nicer if you're in profile and your arm here because it fills the frame, and then maybe like this
getting
is
them
more
comfortable first,
like,
kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. So you get the mood first, and then you just look at it compositionally, because bodies, it just becomes part of the composition, right? And you want to create interesting lines, and sometimes that's what the picture is about. Sometimes the best picture you can get is just one that's compositionally interesting, but the better picture, the pictures actually that people appreciate more, I think, are the ones that are, it's a genuine expression. It feels like a real moment. It feels like an honest expression. And sometimes you get both of those things in the same picture, and that's like the exception, and that's like the best thing, especially if you're shooting fashion. You really want like a beautiful image,
Right.
but then to make it something more than just a fashion picture, you hope that there's something like interesting or honest about how the person is presenting themselves. Sometimes if I'm shooting fashion that has a lot of movement in it, like a full body thing, I'll put the camera on a tripod and just set the autofocus thing to like a very wide net, and literally just like hold the button down as I direct them, or put it on like a trigger, and like I'll do the poses with the model, and they'll, we'll do it together, and while I'm firing the camera.
That's so
um
cool. I never even thought about doing that.
yeah, but I'm like a mover. Like I like to, it's hard for me to, it depends on the shoot, but for that kind of fashion thing, I like to, it helps to get people fired up to go, like, let's do it together, like that's. And
Yeah.
sometimes, a lot of the times now, I mean, there are very few models now who last more than a couple of years. So there are not a lot of models who actually know what they're doing in that way. Like I've been shooting for, like 10-15 years. So like I know how to pose better than most models do, because I've done it in a zillion shoots, or, whereas a lot of models, they've only been doing it for 6 months or a year or 2 years, and they still don't really know what they're doing. So you have to like do it with them.
That's so
Um,
cool. I love that.
yeah, so that's how I
It
would
takes a
shoot
real
that.
man to do that, by the way. It takes it to get out there alongside a
Yeah,
model.
no, I'm like, I have no shame. No,
Did they ever look at you like, who the fuck is this guy?
I'm sure they do, but at the end of the day, the pictures turn out well, so I think that'll
Yeah, as
just like
long as the
bear some
picture
out.
comes out well. Yeah.
Um, but so that's for that type of thing. That's what I would do, and then for portraiture, I usually shoot on like an RZ67, which is a 6x7 film camera, and I'm looking down into the viewfinder. And then so for that, I would be looking down and then occasionally looking up and telling them what to do and establishing eye contact and trying to have a more normal social interaction with them while we're shooting.
Right.
But it doesn't work with everybody. Some people don't. I think the goal is to get to a place where they're comfortable with you, like looking directly at them and talking to them and having a real conversation with them. Because a lot of people come into a photo shoot not thinking that they're going to have to engage in that way. They think it
Right.
is all just about the way they look. And it's like, actually, no, you actually have to connect with me, and you actually have to maybe tell me something about your life. And it can't just be about the facade. You have
Right.
to open up a little bit. And that's why I'm so like open and goofy and unfiltered, and because we don't have time for like facades.
Right.
You have to get to the core of it quickly, especially now when, like, for the Dan pictures, I think we only shot for 20 minutes, and it's like 5 years ago, or in another circumstance, I would have insisted on shooting all day,
Right.
like 6 hours to get, 3 or 4 pictures or 5 pictures. And now I guess the industry has just changed, but I mean, really for the past 2 years, a lot of the shoots that I've been doing, because of social media, the volume of photos you have to do is so much higher, and people's just idea of what it means to do a photo shoot is totally different.
Right.
Most of the shoots I do now, we're done in half an hour.
Yeah.
And it, like, I did a shoot a couple years ago, which I thought was a big deal, and I was like, why is nothing planned? Like, it was the morning of the shoot, and I hadn't even been confirmed yet. And I got a call at 7:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, being like, okay, the shoot's happening at 11 o'clock. Here's the location. Go. You're doing 1 page for this magazine. And I showed up at the location, and it was like a very fancy situation. And there was nobody there yet. And so I walked in. I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what we're shooting. I don't know how many shots we're doing. And then the team from the magazine showed up, and they're like, okay, we're actually doing 6 pages, not 1. And we are only allowed in the location for 2 hours. And hair and makeup's going to take an hour and a half. And you're only allowed in the area that we're shooting for 5 minutes at a time. And we're doing 6 pages. So that means I have to do 1 shot a minute, basically. It basically left us with 5 minutes to do 6 pages. And that was the first time I was like, is this how people do things now? Like, is this normal?
That's when you put on continuous shooting and you just spray and pray the whole time,
Yeah. And, people look down on that when you're starting out. There's a lot of like criticism for that kind of working. But like, if you're criticizing shooting quickly and relying on auto exposure or whatever, you're probably not actually working in the field, because like time is way more important than the integrity of whether or not you shot everything on manual. Like, it's good to do that.
I think it's a law of averages. You know what I mean? Like, you have to, like, I just did a shoot with my wife. Actually, we were testing out the new camera, and I took so many pictures, and I'm like, oh my God, I took so many pictures. But there are so many options. It's like, at a certain point, it is, like, if you take sort of like the pretentious art school shit out of it, portrait photography, in a way, I'm not saying that you should just kind of like blindly shoot, but like, if something's going well, like, the technology allows for you to hold the trigger down and to like get those shots. Like, wouldn't you want to have the options? It's not like you're doing like push-ups or something. You're literally holding your finger down. I don't understand. It's like some weird. I have a theory. I think it's sort of like a carryover from like, and I'm not taking anything away from film. I want to do film, but I think that there's a certain school of like the old school and the new school. And I think it's like the new technology kind of freaks them out, and I think that they're like, no, you can't do it that way. But I think it's because like they didn't come up on that. But I feel like if you have a multi-$1,000 camera, like, use that shit. That's what it's for. Totally. Yeah.
There's definitely
a credit card debt. Use it.
There is. I understand why people have sort of nostalgia for the old way of doing things, and especially if you think about like Avedon, shooting on 8x10, shooting the type of fashion work that I just described. Shooting on continuous and letting the model fly across the frame, like, and getting 25 exposures. He used to do that in 1 exposure on 8x10, which is really hard. And there's definitely something to be said for the fact that he was better at it than anybody else, and like, because he worked at it and he knew what he was doing. And it is hard, and we should respect him and anybody else who can do that with the confines of that technology. But I think that any photographer who was working in the 50s or 60s, who we hold up as being this icon or whatever, they would all be using digital today, and they would all be taking advantage, especially somebody like Irving Penn, for example, who was a great darkroom printer and was really into the technology of darkroom and experimenting with different processes. I mean, if he had lived a little bit longer, if he had been born later, I think it's very likely that he would have experimented with digital manipulation and with all digital printing and with digital cameras, because it's pushing the boundary in the same way that darkroom printing was experimental and pushing the boundaries in the 60s. It's more about mentality than about. There's nothing intrinsically better about. I can't believe I'm saying this, because I have been such a film snob for like most of my career, but.
You're getting woke now. You're seeing the light. You're coming over to the dark side, baby.
Yeah.
Come on to the.
You said earlier.
I'll send you my Lightroom presets. We could get.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I even have. I have the Lightroom app on my phone, and I take phone pictures all the time and just run them through like the presets that I've built on my phone. And I get messages sometimes on Instagram, like if I just post something on my Instagram story, they're like, "Oh,
Right.
what film stock was this?" And I'm like, "No, that's like taken on my phone on with a Lightroom filter on it." And it's like, if you can't tell the difference,
Right.
who cares? Like it looks good. That's kind of the point.
And I think it's gotten better too. I remember when I was in school and people were using presets and stuff like that. It always had this sort of like orangey, kind of like
Yeah,
weird, like sort of almost like
filmy.
yeah, like a little bit too filmy. Whereas I think that there are and not all Lightroom presets are created equal,
Yeah,
but there are some people, Julia Trotti, who I mentioned before. I'll put the link in below, and hopefully one day she comes on the podcast. But it's sort of like an art, like getting the right preset to sort of have, or I'm using the term preset, but knowing how
any
to,
kind of post production. Yeah,
right, yeah, yeah, like that post production, like that knack for getting that look. Some people can do it, and it kind of takes like the trained eye to get it to look a certain way, and sometimes it's like worth like paying for that,
hmm
but yeah, sometimes you can't tell.
yeah. I
I'd
think
be curious if
my
I would test people, because I got some shit coming out that's not on film that looks very like if
yeah,
you hold it up next to like classic film
yeah,
pictures, it's almost indecipherable at this point.
yeah. I mean, the
Maybe.
difference is the difference for me between film and digital has more to do with the way that you work, not with how it looks.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the other great thing about film is that nobody can see what you're doing. So it's really great for portraits because then the person you're shooting can't be so insecure because there isn't a monitor right here where they go, "Oh, I don't like my hair like that," or "Oh, no, I can't." They have to trust me.
Yeah.
And the fact is, I usually do know better than them about how to make them look good.
Yeah.
Um, and so film helps in that way because it's they forget about how they look because they're not constantly being
I try not to
reminded
show
of
them unless it's like an absolute like banger of a picture, but like I
yeah,
try not to show them because it,
yeah,
it kind of messes with
yeah.
the feng shui of the whole
That's the
situation.
other side of it though. Sometimes you want to show them, like sometimes it helps, which is the great thing about digital. Like
Yeah.
and actually something you said earlier
More
was
more of more of this I'll do sometimes. Like
yeah, yeah.
whatever this
I
thing
very
was, do that face again.
yeah, 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 exactly.
Because you were blinking and I need to get this because everything else is not working.
Yeah, and like even going back to what we were talking about with the way people used to do things and this weird respect that people have for film and the negative view people have of, as you said, spraying and praying and shooting too much. I don't think a lot of um, photographers who are starting out necessarily know how much film used to be shot on a normal shoot. Like, Avedon wasn't shooting one roll and getting it in one roll. He was shooting hundreds of rolls of films a day.
Really?
And it's like, and I won't even use his as an example, but there are many photographers who can't remember who it was, but I remember I was reading about some campaign that was shot in the 90s and they were shooting on medium format film. And I'm almost certain, it was a week-long campaign, and they shot thousands of rolls of film, rapid fire. The way that
Some
we would
poor intern was just there for hours
right,
and
yeah,
hours and
yeah,
hours.
exactly. I think they built a lab on set so they could develop as they were shooting, but the they would be shooting in the way that we would shoot digital now, and they would be shooting Polaroids. So they would be able to show the model what they were doing, go more of this, less of this, whatever. So really the digital workflow is just a slightly better version of what people were doing with film at the highest levels anyway.
Yeah.
So that snobbery around, get it in one shot, whatever. And I mean, everything kind of comes back to Avedon for me. Like he kind of did everything.
Can you make me
Um,
a list of people, by the way? Like,
oh yeah, oh my God, yeah. I'll send you pictures of my bookshelf and you just look them all up.
yeah,
I like Avedon did a huge amount of post production, as did Penn, and the snobbery that surrounds like Photoshop is, I think it's like childish because
yeah.
I don't think I have it at hand here, but there's some great Avedon darkroom. I don't know what the proper term is. His notes, his retouching notes in the 60s.
And you
And
could,
if
that's in a book.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh,
It's
that
in
sounds so
I
cool.
think I just packed it, but it's it's around online actually. You can find it. It's a picture of someone's face. I can't remember who.
I'm kind
He's
of
got
broke,
all.
so I do all the stuff on Pinterest, so I get like the.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
The and it's all of the circles around different regions of the face where you increase the exposure here by 2 stops, here by 1 stop, here by half a stop, here by a quarter stop, whatever. And if you think about, it's exactly what we do in Photoshop, and
Yeah.
that's how the greatest portraits of the 20th century were made.
That radial light tool, and you kind of just like put it over the side of their face. I love kind of getting things like a little bit underexposed and then doing like that little spotlight feature, like
Mm.
in Lightroom. Oh yeah, we could trade secrets after this.
I do. I mean, I don't. I do a huge amount of post. I
Yeah,
sometimes clients come to me. I mean, not all the time. I think it's pretty apparent that I do a lot of post, but sometimes I get clients coming to me going, "Oh, I love those just like clean portraits that you do, which is very simple, very real." And like, oh, I spent 10 hours on that picture. Like I spent 10 hours retouching that. Like, and it's just because retouching is not just making skin smooth. It's
right.
also adjusting the values of the image and dodging and burning. And I basically repaint over the pictures that I do. Like they look nothing like they did when they came out of camera.
That's awesome.
And but the
That's good
goal,
to
of
know.
course, is yeah. I mean,
It
I'd
makes you
have
feel
no.
better about my fuckery behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think people should fuck with things more. Like you, especially with digital, like you have to mess up the files because otherwise they look like what everybody else did. And part of the interesting, part of the mythology of film and the photographers who we idolize is that we look at the photos and we don't necessarily understand how they made them.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Even if we think we understand it, you try and try and replicate, this photo. You're going to get close because you're going to go, oh yeah, it's just like two side lights and then like a hot, I mean, cars use hot lights, which I know. So you put like a Fresnel here and like two here on a black backdrop, and it must be that easy.
I
And
love
it's
this
like,
stuff.
well, it's like, it's obviously not that easy, because if it was that easy, like you would have taken that photo. And
I love
there's
that
so much.
picture of Kennedy that he has from the side profile of Kennedy.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So many
Definitely.
people photographed that guy, but nobody got that shot. That's
Kennedy.
what I
Yeah.
love about that work is that it's like, and that's how you can tell like they have a unique style. Like somebody who has just been photographed to death, and then like you get this new,
Yeah.
completely different vision of that person. It's
Yeah.
just like remarkable, and I think that's what's really great about photography. So
That would be, that's definitely something I think about. I mean, you don't always have the opportunity to take a new picture of someone, especially like if it's somebody who's been photographed a lot. It's really hard to get a new picture of them.
yeah,
But as a photographer, you want to do that. You want to put your own, maybe not your own stamp on it, but you want to do something that's different and something that's exceptional, and a photo that's going to stand out amongst the rest of them. And I like the idea of taking. It's sort of like a something I keep in the back of my head is, if I have the opportunity to photograph somebody, I want to take the picture of them that is going to last their entire life. The picture that people are constantly going to be referencing, the picture that looks the most like them, you know?
yeah.
And that's what Karsh did so well. And it's so funny that you brought Karsh up, because not a lot of people actually reference him or know about him. Even within the industry, where everybody in fashion
I
knows
went
every.
so deep on Pinterest pinning things because after that talk with Art Schreiber, he said like you put like your work on one wall and then the other work on the other one, and then I felt like I had like permission to do like a deep dive and just spend a lot of time, and yeah, I went. This girl actually blocked. I didn't even know it was possible to be blocked on Pinterest. I saved so many of her pins that she blocked me. I was
Maybe
like,
she thought you were a bot.
yeah, I was like, no, I'm just like some very.
That's funny.
I know she probably did think that I was a bot because I literally saved like 300 pins. I always wonder about that stuff. Sometimes I'm like, I wonder what people think when they see, like, Rob Johnson has saved 375 of your.
Yeah, what's he using them for?
But so much of it is just like, for me, I love, even if it's funny because I used to kind of curate my, and I'm referring to Pinterest, but in general,
Mhm.
I used to try and curate things for sort of like the look, and I was like a tastemaker or whatever. But now, sometimes it's just like it could be like a grainy, crappy picture from the 90s, but I love the composition. So I feel like
Yeah,
when people would see the stuff that I save, they'd be like, "What? Why did he save that for?" But what they don't know is I like the way that like the elbow is like, like.
yeah,
So it's weird, but then end up getting blocked by people for
Yeah. No, that's you hit
pinning
on
too
something
much.
important there. I think you have
I
to be
think
able
I've
to look.
lost some friends, by the way, from pinning too many of their pins.
Pinterest is like such a it's a hole, like it's a dark hole that you get sucked into.
Because
Uh
people say they're like, oh, like Pinterest isn't like that good. Yeah, that's because your pins suck. There's a certain. It's weird. There's like a.
because you have to get the algorithm to work for
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
right?
yeah. You really you gotta work the algorithm to get. Pinterest is kind of similar to Instagram, and that like there's a lot of people that like kind of razz on it, and like oh like the algorithm like it doesn't doesn't do it for me or I don't get the right thing. But Pinterest, if you know how to like manipulate it and get it to go a certain way, because it's kind of like referencing the entire internet. So if
Mm-hmm.
you just get like, if there's 1,200 photography pictures to reference from, they're gonna be like, oh, okay, this guy is clearly in the weeds here. Then you get to like the Pinterest 2.0, if you will,
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not
the
very.
dark web of
I don't
Pinterest.
use Pinterest that much. I use it honestly. The only thing I use Pinterest for is for like as I'm moving into an apartment and I'm looking for like paint colors for the walls, and there's a
Yes,
great resource of like paint colors. I'm like, what does it look like in this room?
I have a
That's
board
my
for
the
you.
only thing on my Pinterest.
I have a board for you. It's called Pantone, and I saved every
Yeah.
single Pantone ever made. Pinterest actually, I was kind of into it, but like not really. It was sort of like my safe place when the shit was really hitting the fan with COVID.
Yeah.
It was sort of like my coping mechanism. I was doing a lot of therapy and like a lot of like AA and shit, and I would just come home and just like mindlessly pin things for hours, just hoping that my life would get better. And now it's pretty significant. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been really fun. I think we just became best friends. I think we could talk for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
a talker.
I'm planning on eventually, once COVID is all over, going to Canada. I definitely want to start out in Toronto. I've made a
Yeah.
couple friends in that neck of the
Good
woods.
place. I'm in New York all the time normally. Like
Yeah.
when.
Well, for now, you'll come to me, but then eventually I'll go to you
Yeah. Yeah.
one
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Goals, post COVID goals. Where
Yeah.
can people find you online? What's the best place to get in touch?
I'm pretty much just on Instagram. I don't have any other social media, so it's at Ted Belton, just my name, and then tedbelton.com.
You locked down the website. That's pretty good.
Years ago, and nobody ever goes to it. Nobody goes to websites anymore. All my jobs come through Instagram.
That's so funny.
Yeah, so that's it. That's me. Thank you so
Cool.
much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
I need you to send me a list of all the people to check out. Send me like the deep
Yeah.
cuts of stuff, and then eventually I'll get my money right, and then I'll get some dope ass books and shit.
Well, it's all available online. Like you can,
Yeah.
it's all the
Are
same.
are they expensive or are they like or some of them are like really expensive, some of them are cheap? Most of them are expensive in the
I'm
fashion
like a
world. Right?
deal hunter. Like I spend a lot of time on in old bookstores, in thrift shops, in online, looking for
This
like
sounds
what
so fun.
it is. It's like my hobby, like looking for what I know to be really good or valuable books, and like I try and find them for $2, $3, and then sometimes I just like cough up the cash and
Right.
pay. Like I just ordered. I mean, not that this was super expensive, but I do like. There's a photographer named Jack Davidson. I don't know if you know him. He's
No.
pretty hot right now, and he
Right.
just did this limited edition book that I haven't even opened yet, and it's like pictures of the last two of a certain breed of elephant. It's just like I don't know. I've never opened this before. I just got it in the mail, and it's like the most beautiful
Oh my god.
photos. Anyway, I'll send you the link. But anytime I see anything where I'm just like, oh, that looks like a beautiful book. That's
Yeah.
something I'm going to regret not owning.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
If I
also
have the money, I'll buy it.
it would be good also for a list of people that are like also like on Instagram and currently working, and I'll try and interview them.
Yeah, I can put together. I can do like a thing of a reading list or whatever.
I love it. I'm
Yeah,
here
for
for it.
sure. Yeah.
All right, brother.
Cool.
This has been so much fun. Thank you again. You've been so gracious with your time. All right, well, tell
All right.
Dan I said hello and I love him.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon. See you.
All right, bye.
Bye.